All right, we're back with another video relating to labs. I made an earlier video that walked through how to prepare a pre-lab. And in this video, I'm going to hopefully explain how you prepare a formal lab, which is what you do after you complete the experiment. So we're going to go ahead, I'm going to share the screen and we're going to jump right in and walk through a PowerPoint presentation on the formal lab. So again, this is how you format your formal lab. Okay, so again, in the top left-hand corner of your typed document, you're going to include your name, a semicolon, and then the names of your lab partners. Underneath that, you will put the date. In the middle of the page, towards the top, you will put the experiment number. That's going to be designated by, a chapter and an experiment number, and then the title of it. So for the experiment that we walked through in the previous example, Trevor Melton, again, was doing the experiment. Will Dean and Nathan Stickles were his lab partners, and the experiment was experiment 3.1, which was the conservation of mass. That was the title of the experiment. So that's what you put as the heading of your formal lab. Your formal lab does need to be typed, all of it. So there's a couple caveats. We'll get to those. We'll talk about it when we get to those. But that's the beginning of your formal lab. Again, there are 5 sections in your formal lab. We have an abstract, a procedure, the data and observations, a section called discussion and analysis, and then a conclusion. The formal lab does need to be typed. You're going to bold each section heading just like you did in the pre-lab. And again, no personal pronouns will be used throughout the lab. Let's go ahead and jump right into the first section, which is the abstract. The abstract is kind of an overview of the lab, okay? In 120 words or less, you're going to explain to me you're going to give me an overview of the purpose of the experiment, the procedure, and the results. This can be very, it doesn't have to be incredibly wordy. It can be, again, it's a summary. So let's look at an example of that in an actual lab. So for the conservation of mass experiment, here's a good abstract. The purpose of this experiment is to confirm the law of mass conservation experimentally. This was done by measuring the combined masses of several substances. The compounds were then combined, resulting in a chemical reaction. After the reaction subsided, the combined mass of substances was again measured, resulting in a mass that remained the same. Okay, so you're giving it. So again, I'm going to actually pull up my annotation tool, and I'm going to show you that we've got, here's the purpose, the overview of the purpose, to confirm the law of mass conservation experimentally. How did we do that? We did that by taking a couple substances, combining them, measuring them before and after. This is my purpose. This is the procedure over here. I'm just going to put procedure, PROC. It's a procedure. I spent too much time on this. And then resulting in a mass that remained the same. That's the results. Okay. So in a nutshell, we're going to do all those things. I want an overview of the purpose. I want an overview of the procedure, and I want an overview of the results. If you count the words, now you don't need to count words in your abstract, but I'm just telling you, this particular abstract was 56 words long. Okay, so you can see in several sentences you can easily get all the information that you need in 120 words or less. So that is an example of an abstract. All right, let's go on to our next section. See if I can. I need to stop. There we go. All right. The procedure. Now, in the pre-lab, you were writing the procedure in the present tense. When you get to the formal lab, you're going to write your procedure in the past tense. It should contain all the necessary steps written in the level of detail needed to be able to repeat the experiment. So if you typed up your pre-lab and you have all the procedure written out, you just need to look and make sure that there's nothing that changed, and then change it all to past tense. So it does give you a step up if you type up the pre-lab and have the procedure already typed. You do need to change all the procedures to past tense. You also, if there's anything you did differently in actuality from what the experiment laid out, you need to make sure that you incorporate those changes into your procedure, because what you're writing down is what you actually did, not what you were supposed to do, but what you actually did. So if there's any changes, make sure you note those changes as part of your procedure. If there's any unknown data that you collected, again, make sure you include that as procedural steps. And again, no personal pronouns. Okay, so that's an overview of the procedure. What would a procedure look like? It would look like this. Again, if you remember what we did in the first video, it said measure the mass. Oh, let's go back. Oh, hang on, I'm the wrong way here. Okay, it said measure the mass of the empty beaker, measured the mass. After recording that data, added a qualitative measurement of 60 milliliters of vinegar, added a qualitative measurement of 10 milliliters of cabbage juice. You can just see all of the procedural steps have been changed to the past tense. That's really all that's different, unless you've made some changes to the procedure in the actual experiment. But it's really just changing the procedure from the pre-lab to be in the past tense. Okay, now let's talk about data and observations. Any data that you collected should be reported in a tabular or a table format, okay? You should also include any observations that you noted. And again, you may have observations only, you may have data only, you may have both. This section, the data section, is only for measured data, okay? You're not gonna include any calculated, that's what we call derived data. The calculated or derived data will be in your analysis. So this is only for data that you measured as part of the experiment, but it should be included in tabular format. And then if you had a graph, you would also include that in this section. So what would that look like? Okay, here we go. Again, we're moving to 2 pages, so you can see I've got the page 1 here. When I show you the observations on the next page, again, we've got page 1 and page 2. So if you have more than 1 page in your formal lab, make sure you note the pages on the bottom. You can see here's my table. I've got the mass before the chemical reaction, which is 155.7, and the mass after. If you remember in the pre-lab, this was left blank, and I had in a blue font the data that was measured as part of the experiment. When you get to your formal lab, you're going to type that data up, okay? So that's your typed up data. And then here would be the second page. Again, because this stuff is in the heading, you're going to keep the names up top, the title and the experiment number, the second page here, and then here's our observations. After adding the lye to the beaker, the solution turned from pink to yellow in color and the beaker became warm. Some particles in the solution did not dissolve. That's great for observations for this experiment. And then the discussion and analysis. And this is a very important section. This is the part where you tell me what you learned by doing the experiment. All of these experiments have purpose. There are no experiments we do that are just fluff, just for the sake of doing something. They all have purpose. They all tie to the concepts within the chapter. So you're going to tell me what you learned by completing this experiment. If you have calculations to be performed or to be done on your measured data, once we get into the nuts and bolts of chemistry, you'll take measured data and then you will apply mathematical equations to it to get particular results. All of those applied numbers, calculations, data points are going to be found in the discussion and analysis. The measured data from the actual experiment will belong in the data section. If you have calculations and it's difficult for you to access a word processing software that has equations, you can write that in ink. That's one of the 2 things that you can put in ink in a formal lab. Everything else must be typed. The 2 things that can be included that have to be written in ink is you can include calculations in ink, and if you have a graph to include, that can be handwritten, but again, in ink. Okay? If you're interpreting your data, if you discuss what you expected to find, what you actually found, if you're going to accept or dismiss a hypothesis, you would do that here in the discussion and analysis. You also would note in this section any sources of error and how that might have had implications for your experiment. If you have an idea to better the experiment, you would include that here. Now, one thing I want to make sure that you understand, this is a discussion of the results. It's not about how you feel about the lab. So what I'm not looking to see in a discussion is, I thought it was cool, I didn't like it. It's not about what you think or feel. It's simply about what did you learn by doing this experiment. If you sit down to write a formal lab and you're not really sure what you should be including in your analysis, you can go to the lab schedule document that's posted. It has all the labs for the year. That document also has sample discussion questions for every single lab in the book. So if you're kind of stumped and you're not sure what you should be writing about in your discussion, go to that document, find your lab, and look at the sample discussion questions. They're a good jumping off point for your analysis. Okay, so that's what I expect to see in your discussion. Let's look at an example. Here we go. Again, this is the first page. Here we are on the second page. This experiment started with a substance containing an anthocyanin, making it clear the substance was acidic. A basic substance was then added to the acidic substance and a chemical reaction was observed. It was easy to detect, should be easy to detect, that a chemical reaction had taken place as the solution color changed and the beaker heated up. This is what a discussion is. It's you talking about what you learned in the lab. That's what I expect to see in your discussion and analysis. And then finally, the last section is the conclusion. This is the easiest section. It's summarizing the conclusion. If you had a calculated or quantifiable result, you would state that, but typically one sentence is adequate for a high school science lab. Here is a great example of a conclusion. This is, again, we're back to our lab. That's the first page. Here's the second page, the conclusion. Through the process of a chemical reaction, the law of mass conservation was affirmed. That's all there is to it, okay? All right, and then final notes. Every formal lab is going to be worth 15 points, making each lab, the pre-lab and the formal lab together, worth a total of 25 points. You'll receive up to 3 points for each of the following correctly formatted and prepared sections of your pre-lab. Again, an abstract, a procedure, data and observations, discussion and analysis, and conclusion. There is a lab report rubric in the general info folder, which will give you further information about what a 3-point abstract looks like versus a 2-point versus a 1-point. There's a full rubric that should make that very clear to you. Again, all formal labs must be typed. If you need a sample, there's a sample formal lab available in the general info folder in Schoology. And finally, the main purpose of the formal lab is to allow you to communicate to me what you learned by doing the experiment. If you remember back to the pre-lab, I told you that's primarily for you, to prepare you to be able to do the lab well. The formal lab is for me. This is where you get to tell me what you learned. So this is what I will be expecting to see in your formal labs. And if anyone has questions on that, obviously, you're welcome to reach out to me and I'm happy to answer those questions, but hopefully this will be very helpful in allowing you to see what is expected in a normal formal lab for any of your Shine Science classes. So thanks for watching and I'll see you soon.